Hello, everyone. I'm Kyo Akasaka. I'm very happy and very honored to be a moderator of this important session, International Response, Regional and Multilateral Response. While this dialogue, Tokyo Global Dialogue, has been addressing current pressing global issues, of course, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has been a dominant subject for every session. Here, in our session, we would mainly focus on the ongoing corona pandemic, climate change and SDGs, and energy, the energy situation from the viewpoints of regional and multilateral cooperation. Some say that multilateralism has been in peril because of the growing number of spoilers who do not respect international order or international norms and international law, as you now see in the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has been warning that the great fracture of the international arena in the light of the rivalry between the United States and China, this great fracture will make the United Nations very difficult to deal with growing number of global issues. Here in our session, there are three guiding questions. First, how can multilateral cooperation meet more effectively the ongoing challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, including vaccine distribution and economic recovery? That's the first one. Second, what are the major challenges and opportunities to achieve the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, including the climate change goal through multilateral cooperation? That's the second one. The third is, how do you assess the main challenges of the current energy situation, which will be worsened because of this, the Ukraine crisis, and how can multilateral cooperation contribute to alleviating its negative impact? We will start with the initial remarks of up to 5 minutes from the distinguished panelists. Following the initial remarks, we will have discussions among panelists, then questions from the audience will follow. Now, I would like to give the first floor to Ms. Rebecca Greenspan, Secretary General of UNCTAD, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Rebecca-san, please.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here with you and sharing this panel with such eminent thinkers and policymakers, and it's a pleasure to be participating in the third Tokyo Global Dialogue. I want to make use of this opening statement to give a general picture of the state of the world economy from the UNCTAD perspective. And I know that we are now very focused on the recent event at the world level, but I want to take your attention to 4 trends that we think are affecting the world economy today and that highlight the asymmetries in the developed and developing world. So the first trend is global inequalities. We think that global inequalities have reached a tipping point. According to our data, developing countries have lost a total of $13 trillion because of COVID-19, including in this projection, foregone income. And while in some advanced countries, household disposal income increased during the last 2 years, this has fueled a consumer boom, spending, but have fueled again the disruption in the supply chain. World poverty is expected to increase by 200 million people, 80 million of which will fall into extreme poverty. So we have to look back to the 80s and 90s of the last century for a crisis as regressive as this one for the developing world. These inequalities have been marked by gaps that were already too wide and got wider in social security, health, gender equality, education, in the divide between formal and informal workers, between big and small businesses, between the offline and the online, and by new gaps, the new gaps that appear, the gaps in vaccine equity, in fiscal packages, in debt stability. So we need to recover together, and so far we are recovering apart. There is a divergence path in the recovery from COVID-19. Second, we think that the state is back in force as an actor of economic policy. So ambitious, far-reaching, innovative industrial and productive policies are now a reality in every single region of the world, no matter the politics, marking a new balance between the market and the state. Third, the pandemic saw important developments in the global financial ecosystem. We saw the largest emission of special drawing rights and important advances in global debt governance, such as the debt suspension initiative for the low-income countries and the common framework for debt treatment. All these initiatives go in the right direction, but our problem is that they are unfinished products. They lack the right quantum and ambition that is needed for the developing world. Just remember that 60% of the special drawing rights, about $400 billion, will probably go unused because they have gone to the countries that don't need it, to the G7 countries. And the debt postponement initiative was not renewed, and so the low-income countries will have to pay $60 billion in debt service cost this year if it is not renewed. And lastly, let me say that trade itself is living a profound period of transformation, perhaps the greatest since the great trading boom of the 90s to the 2000s. So the world trade volume doubled every 5 years. The world is now getting ready for a global economy that is now more technological, more environmentally concerned, more regionally fragmented. So what we see is inventories going up because uncertainty, because of volatility, and many risks are in the trade arena, although we see, as we will say later on, great opportunities too. So let me finish by saying that trade is growing at incredible rates following the 2020 downturn. Global trade is growing at an unprecedented 25%, but this is also causing disruptions and bottlenecks in transport, in logistics, and many developing countries are being left behind from these trends. So I finish here because I already got to my 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rebecca-san. You have identified very important four trends: global inequality, growing global inequality, the fact that state is back, and the third, financial system, particularly debt issue of developing countries, and the fourth is the fragmentation of a trading system, while trade has been growing very exponentially. Now, thank you very much for identifying very important trends in the world economy and trading system. Now, let me turn to the second panelist, Mr. John Ashton, independent speaker and writer, co-founder of E3G, former special representative for climate change at the United Kingdom Foreign and Commonwealth Office. John, you have the floor.
Akasaka-san, thank you very much indeed. And Secretary General Greenspan, Rebecca-san has just really underlined my feeling that you can't really answer those questions that you've put on the table at a time like this unless you look behind them. The answers are not technocratic. So let me begin by saying this. Peace is precious. Peace is fragile. Every breath I take in this session, every word I utter, I dedicate to the victims of the unspeakable acts now taking place in Ukraine, to the heroic people of Ukraine, to our brothers and sisters in Ukraine. Even in this dark hour, may they be blessed and may they be protected. And the perpetrator of those acts, to be clear, is not the great nation that is Russia. It's not the Russian people. It's the dictator Putin. The war he has declared is not only against Ukraine, it's against the very idea that we can only build a better tomorrow by means of peaceful cooperation. It's against everything that we stand for, all of us on this panel, comrades, that we stand for. And that's what's at stake at this moment. Nobody can know where those events will lead. And in the face of the unknown, it's very tempting to retreat into the familiar. So we could talk today as if the world hadn't suddenly changed, about how to keep inching forward as we do, although sometimes backward, as Rebecca has said, in our various processes towards the Sustainable Development Goals, towards climate security, towards more inclusive forms of progress, towards the eradication of poverty and disease. Of course, we can and must talk about those things. But what we also need to talk about is how to restore the foundations of our international system, because, Kyo, I think they really are under more peril than they have ever been in our lifetimes. And that was true even before last week. So we should think of our grandparents who laid those foundations following the defeat of militaristic fascism in Europe and Asia. They were inspired by certain convictions. They believed that what human beings have in common matters more than what divides us. We are one human family. They believed we can solve all our problems, but only if we do so through cooperation under rules that we make and respect together. They believed that to do that, we must make the effort to see the world through each other's eyes. I spent a whole career in diplomacy trying to see the world through others' eyes so that we can build bridges and heal divisions. And they believed, all important, that power must always yield to truth. There can be no alternative realities constructed for the convenience of those who rule. And it was on the basis of those convictions that our grandparents laid that foundation for the system that we inherited, that's grown into what we now have. It was never perfect. It didn't root out long-standing tendencies to oppression, to exploitation, colonialism, racism. Perhaps it mainly reflected the view of the victors of the great 20th century wars and lacked insight from cultures and societies excluded from that foundational group. It became infected for a while after 1989 by the delusion that markets could do no wrong and were indeed the source of virtue as well as prosperity. And it certainly failed to grasp. We haven't yet properly grasped that the ecological fabric and the social fabric are two sides of the same cloth, inseparable one from the other, and that human development depends equally on the integrity of both. But all that said, the system has, through the years, carried a lot of weight and weathered many storms, and we need it now more than we ever did. Today, some other convictions are gaining ground. Truth should always be what power wants it to be. Anything else is fake news. To see the world through the eyes of others is to betray your own group. We don't cooperate to find solutions. We impose solutions on others through competition, conflict, and the exercise of will. And we find our identity and allegiance not by what we have in common, but by how we differ from everyone else. And often those darker convictions are held together by a narrative of aggrieved entitlement. Now it is time to reclaim what is rightfully ours, what was taken from us when we were weak. We can hear that cry from the Kremlin, but we can hear it from many other places too. Those new convictions are, of course, ancient convictions. I've been reading a lot recently the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. It's full of those convictions. They pose a life and death threat to the international system and to our very ability to find shared solutions to shared problems. If they prevail, we will lose everything. And so, as Lenin asked, what is to be done? I have some ideas about that, and I can talk at length about the actual questions on the table, particularly in the area of climate change, where I have a bit of experience. But my time is running out, so I'll only say one more thing. In Japan, you have a word, ganbate, I think I've got that right. Tell me if I've pronounced it right. We'll do our best, I think it says, but we won't try and turn the world upside down. The world we have got used to is turning itself upside down right now. So if we want a better world, we must rediscover how to struggle for what we have started to take for granted. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John, for your passionate statements. Indeed, we have got to think about the victims in Ukraine who are now suffering the devastating assault from Russian soldiers. You mentioned strongly that we have got to address how to restore the international system. The foundations of the international cooperation system are shaken. The foundations which are based on convictions. And you strongly mentioned that the power must yield to truth. And we need more the global system of cooperation now or more than ever, and restore what is right for us. Thank you very much for your passionate statement, and your appeal comes to my heart directly. Thank you, John. And now I would like to ask Amita Sarsia Arsjabana, Executive Secretary of the ESCAP, the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. Armida-san, please.
Yes. Thank you very much, Akasaka-san. At the outset, may I thank the organizer, Japan Institute of International Affairs, for inviting me to speak at this very distinguished forum, the third Tokyo Global Dialogue. And of course, being from the Asia-Pacific region, my remarks will take more of the angle of the region, especially Asia-Pacific. Three elevated risks that we've been experiencing lately, but actually is an ongoing long-term phenomena, which are one is the ongoing one. Now we are entering the third year, the prolonged COVID-19 pandemic. Then the climate change, of course, our region, as you know, contributes about 50% of CO2 emissions, both accumulated as well as the annual increase. Third is the natural disaster. So countries in our region is prone or very vulnerable to natural disaster. But again, as we also know, we have already the global framework, which member states or everybody committed to, which are the 2030 Agenda, SDGs, the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, as well as the 2015, actually, also the same year, Sendai Framework. Yeah, so those are basically the framework, which we are committed to also, which we refer to. But now, as everybody very concerned, and I'm sure you also mentioned, the forum basically also dominated by this concern. Now the geopolitical situation is becoming predominant. Ukraine, Russia, as well as other hotspots, including in our region, which we see an even more intensifying geopolitical situation. Yeah. So therefore, it's very clear that we also need the condition of even more. Of course, we understand this, but even more the condition or precondition of peace and human security to advance further this development. A second point, which I would like also to convey, is that this region has lots of potential, the ability as well as the leadership, the initiatives, including the potential such as population, of course, different. Some countries are already entering the aging phase. Some have this huge youth bulge, youth, young generation, as well as you know, digital transformation, digitalization, acceleration of all that. The digital sphere is so big in this country, almost all countries, and the many innovative creativity that spring out, especially with the pandemic. So many solutions, that is springing up, as well as the resilience and resolve that the region had shown in the past, including past crises. Just look back, 1998, Asia economic crisis, Asia financial crisis, 2008, the global financial crisis, in which the region, I think, managed quite well, including the current pandemic. The region also managed quite well, despite the lack of medicine supplies and so on, so forth. To add in this perspective is, in many instances, we also see some success stories in international cooperation, collaboration within the sub-regional context. So Asia Pacific, we consider it region, but the sub-region, for example, Southeast Asia, Pacific, South Asia, and so forth, we consider it sub-regional context. We know ASEAN, we of course know Pacific, in which many of the initiative commitment can be advanced. I'm talking about development, of course, the economic, social, as long as the politics does not get into the way. The third point, the last point, which I would like also to bring to the forum's attention is, and then the question, actually, how to move forward, especially in advancing multilateralism, which again, if we focus on this, how to address all these development challenges and issue, one I think proposed a focus would be how we could find or develop further a so-called safe space for countries to collaborate, to tackle these challenges. So first is within this third issue is first advanced cooperation through issues that member states stakeholders find common ground, because it's much easier, right? If you collaborate, you start with issues that everybody does not quarrel. what are those issues? I would say SDGs. I would say climate change, climate action, both mitigation, adaptation. I would say the leave no one behind, so all the social development issue. I would say disaster, including disaster mitigation. So we could collaborate across the political regime. Second point is also support. We need collaboration to support the people, at least, yeah, to hold on development gains and then move forward. So what I'm talking about, special reference to a country or states that are in catastrophic. Yeah, so I mean, in our region, we have, right, Myanmar, we have Afghanistan, and a few others. Third is collaborate to build resiliency because of this COVID disaster and all that, yeah, climate change. Collaborate to build resiliency, but in particular, the resilient system. Talking about system, yeah, because we talk about health, we talk about social protection, we talk about education, we talk about how to better prepare the future pandemic, how to also tackle and better prepare for natural disasters. So we need the system, resilience system. Fourth, the last point is then extend. So I convey, yeah, the SG message in this case, which is the inclusive and network multilateralism. This is the kind of multilateralism I think that we should, yeah, develop further. Network multilateralism, they cannot only work among member states. You have to extend that to include the sub-regional organization I mentioned earlier, ASEAN, PIPS, and so on and so forth, including also the banks, yeah, the multilateral development banks, as well as the so-called inclusive multilateralism. So not sufficient only to work among member state countries' government, but also to include other important actors, the private sector, CSO, the parliamentarians, and so on and so forth. Last point, just to close, is of course the political commitment that is important, and because we are in the development related support, yeah, SCAP and also other colleagues here. So how we can also extend our support and collaboration within the multilateralism framework to go in a value chain, yeah. I mean, not only upstream, but extend it to also the kind of support downstream. So including the more concrete related support. So I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Armida-san. Thank you. Indeed, you have identified that we have the common global framework for cooperation, SDGs, and the Asia and the Pacific region for which you are working for has got enormous potential for cooperation. And you mentioned that the issues like climate change and social development and other issues have common grounds among member states. But in your region, you have members like China, India, Japan, and many others. We would come back to the question of how you would keep the cooperation among those players, big players, in good harmony and cooperative spirits. Now, let me turn to the fourth and final speaker, Mr. Nobuo Tanaka, former Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, IEA. He is now chair the Steering Committee of Innovation for Cool Earth Forum, CEO, Tanaka Global Inc. Tanaka-san, please.
Thank you, Akasaka-san. I'm very much delighted to join this program, led by Sasae-san, my very good friend from the time when I worked at the Embassy of Japan in Washington, D.C. IEA was created in 1974 when the first oil crisis happened. triggered by the Arab oil embargo, and creating the strategic stockpile of oil and use it in case of emergency. It just happened 2 days ago, facing the challenge invasion of Russia to Ukraine. The energy ministers of IEA countries got together by the web and decided to release 60 million barrels of oil in 2 months. And this is the fourth time in the history of IEA the release of stockpile happened. And I was executive director, and I also triggered the release in the case of Libyan crisis in 2011. Before that, 1991 in the Gulf War, and 2005 in the Hurricane Katrina hit Gulf of Mexico. These are the 4 occasions that we have used oil strategic stockpile release. Henry Kissinger, he is the founding father of the IEA, told me when I met him before I was appointed to the executive director, Mr. Tanaka, the IEA's role is energy security. So your job, my job, should be to engage China and India into the IEA, because energy consumption of these countries will surpass those of IEA as a whole. So without these countries, it's impossible to make energy security. I tried my best, but China and India are already the kind of observer status, but not yet the full member. India requested the full membership to the IEA about 2 years ago. This is a very interesting move for energy security. But Henry Kissinger meant not only by the oil consumption or energy consumption. He said China and India is necessary to join the IEA if the organization is aiming up to be a relevant organization for the climate change mitigation, because carbon dioxide emission, 60% of them come from the energy sector. So the energy transition is definitely necessary to achieve climate change mitigation. So the issue of energy security is getting more and more complicated because countries moving away from oil and using more gas, more renewable energy sources, and also nuclear power. So we need comprehensive energy security, not only oil, but other things together. And also this sustainability nexus is added to the mission of the IEA. So this complicates the situation much, much more. We have to think about hydrogen. We have to think about electricity, balance, flexibility, and critical minerals for the batteries. So the energy security is widened dramatically these days. And suddenly came the crisis of, again, the energy supply by the Russian invasion. It's related to the climate change mitigation, but now because the many industrial financing institutions are aiming at decarbonization and green investment or green bond is everywhere, TCFD, disclosure lists and standards are getting a kind of very strong force to the financial sector, change the sustainable operation. So the oil and gas companies are not investing enough for the supply of oil and gas, and this created the huge gap in the last year. So oil and gas prices are going higher and higher. Now this situation of the Russia created the energy crisis much harder. I am very much concerned about if the sanction by the Europe of Americans going to stop the trade flow of oil or gas with Russia. This will be an enormous energy crisis may happen to the global community. The problem of the energy policy is that if we change policies from time to time, no private sector invest to the long-term the infrastructure of the energy. The nuclear is the same thing, renewable thing. The government policy must be stable. And I had the experience, very interesting meeting with Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, in 2009, together with industrial leaders of Germany. I asked her why Germany is not using nuclear power. She told me that, Mr. Tanaka, I'm an engineer, I'm a scientist. I know nuclear power very well, and I know how to do it. But to do it in Germany, please give me votes. So she's a wise politician rather than a good scientist. So she changed from time to time the nuclear policy, and now Germany decided to phase out nuclear by 2022, this year, and also just reducing the coal by 2030. So that's creating too much dependence of gas from Russia, because there's no other way to make an energy supply. So this mistake caused a huge geopolitical risk of Germany, and now Germany is reconsidering the use of nuclear in the future, or maybe using the coal for the transitional purposes. Gas is really necessary for the transition, so we have to reconsider how we balance the climate change mitigation and energy security and use of nuclear in coming days. Japan can contribute dramatically to the current crisis by restarting nuclear power and reducing the consumption of natural gas. And we can sell the excess of the LNG tankers to Europe. And this kind of contribution can be done if policymakers or politicians can decide to restart the nuclear power. But after Fukushima accident, this is a very, very politicized issue and difficult. But so we have to think about climate change mitigation. Nuclear could be useful. And also for the energy security, it is very much important. But problem of the nuclear is proliferation issue, the weaponization of the nuclear. This is another political mistakes that the global leaders made. I was invited to the L'Aquila Summit, G8 Summit at that time in 2009. This is the first summit President Obama came, and the guy who was sitting next to me was Gaddafi. And he said the colonialism is a problem because Africa is in trouble. Obama said the problem is not colonialism, it's a corruption. So discussion was very interesting. And Gaddafi started anti-corruption campaign the year after. He quit the nuclear weapon, development. So he followed all the American and UK requests in terms of the change, but US decided to invade in Libya and got rid of him. And this is a lesson for North Korea to maintain the weapon. And Mr. Trump came in, and then he stopped the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement with Iran, and penalized Iran while Iran did not have any weapon at this moment. So this sent another strong message to North Korea to have a weapon. And here came Mr. Putin to invade Ukraine, regardless of the agreement with UK, US, and Ukraine to abort the nuclear arsenal from Ukraine. So this is again sending the very strong message that small countries needed to have a weapon, nuclear weapon, to stop the invasion by the big countries. This is a problem. So for the use of peaceful nuclear power, Japan should do something what we can do. We should not have a weapon, but we maintain the peaceful user and try to promote that movement with smaller countries. Non-weapon states must be admitted to be a permanent seat holder of Security Council of the United Nations. Currently, P5 is our only nuclear weapon state. Japan should join the nuclear weapon ban treaty and work with Germany as a leader of non-weapon states and use of peaceful nuclear power. That kind of UN structural change is probably necessary now, and Japan should promote that kind of energy policy or non-weapon policy. That is probably our contribution to the current very difficult challenge for the international energy and nuclear governance. That is my contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tanaka-san. Indeed, sanctions on Russia for its invasion of Ukraine and climate change requirements, responses to climate change issue make the energy situation very vulnerable, and the energy security is an important issue due to the gaps, as you mentioned, identified in the transition and the current political situation of the world. Now we have got a lot of the statements and issues before us. I would like to ask Rebecca-san. Rebecca-san, you may have to leave a little bit earlier because of your other engagement. What is your reaction to this, the question of the fragile or difficult international order, multilateralism, which has been imperiled because of the various political, economic, and trade issues? Rebecca-san, what is your response?
Yes, thank you very much. I think that this has been a very important round of interventions. Thank you to all. You know, how do we strengthen multilateral system or multilateral cooperation in a world that is more multipolar and less multilateral, you know, as everybody has been saying, where geopolitics is driving everything, you know, cooperation, investment, trade. I think that we have to think how we make a possibility for the multilateral system really to get strengthened. I agree completely with John that we need multilateralism today more than ever, seeing what all is happening. And I want to say that part of it is to try to bridge the divide also with the developing countries, because we cannot play this multipolar world only in the North Atlantic part of the world. We need to include the developing world. And precisely one of your questions before was about cooperation to meet the challenges of the crisis. We were talking about the COVID crisis, but now we are talking about a more general crisis, because what is happening now is even deepening even more the crisis we were in. We were talking about very high energy prices. Now we have energy and food hitting again the developing world. And we can have a domino crisis of debt in the developing world. And we can avoid it. We have the instruments to be able to stop that from happening. So let me...
Sorry, sorry to interrupt you, but I've made the fatal mistake that you will be with us for until the last moment, right, of this session. Archabana-san has got another engagement. She has got to leave very soon. So I'd like to give the floor to her right now and come back to you. All right?
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Back to my colleague. With
pleasure. You have the floor. Do you think that this multilateral cooperation, multilateralism is still in good shape. In your region, you have China, India, and America in their relationship and difficult relationship among them. Would they be able to keep multilateralism intact and regional cooperation from the point of view of ESCAP?
Right. Yes. If I may, I would like to refer to the context of ESCAP, in which ESCAP as a regional commission, 53 member states, Asia Pacific, right? 5 sub-regions, including Central Asia, Central Asia, East Asia, Pacific, Southeast Asia, and South and Southwest Asia. Yeah, and in terms of this member countries, you mentioned already, but actually all the P5s are our full member. So not only Russia, China, US, but also UK, France, and all of them are active. All of them are very active, and especially increasingly so. Yeah, and not to mention, of course, India, Pakistan are our member state, are okay as well. Of course, Japan, yeah, and the ASEAN, and including Afghanistan, Myanmar. Yeah, so as well as DPRK, of course, DPRK. Yeah, so that shows, yeah, I mean, the challenges also if we could not find again common issues that we could sort of bring countries together, bring member states together to advance certain collaboration. So therefore, yeah, in our case, we are quite fortunate in the sense that member states can come together. You could see several more recent resolution. Basically, it was formulated in a constructive manner. Of course, yeah, it's very difficult, but constructive, including one on ocean, which was not easy, yeah, because the South China Sea and so on and so forth. But yet we managed to get that in 2019, ocean, including the Building Back Better and a few others. And now we are advancing regional cooperation for air pollution, in which also no quarrel, which is good. Yeah, all countries eager and would like to contribute to address this air pollution, which link very closely to climate change. So I think this is one. Yeah. So again, as I mentioned, Ellen, what are the issues that you have common ground, and let's work together without any particular labeling. Yeah, because once you put labeling, then you get hit. Labeling meaning, of course, yeah, as you know, certain countries have their certain let's say cooperation that they would like to advance. So we try not to advance that, but rather what are the common issues. Yeah, and we managed to do that so far. Yeah, and secondly, yeah, get to concrete. Yes, so declaration is on fine, but then what would be the concrete and showcasing the success stories from the respective countries? Fine, China is very good on what? I don't know, renewable solar, wind, but are okay, very good on what? The battery technology. India also advancing through ISA, right? ISA, and now another one with UK on this regional or the regional energy connectivity. Yes, so fine. And then the other is also part of that. So we try to just go directly, yeah, work on the issues that we could find common ground. Because with that, then we build this confidence. Because again, my last point is for cooperation, multilateralism to advance, you need to build confidence. So confidence building is not only for political political, issues, but confidence building is, I think, is also very important to advance this cooperation, on the global development issues, including SDGs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. And I wish you all the best. And thank you for your optimistic view of the cooperation among big players as well as less big members of the ESCAP. Now, sorry, Rebecca-san, yes, you still, please continue to say what you are saying about the need of multilateralism.
Yes, thank you very much. And let me follow on my colleague in the sense that there are many things that we can do right now. And if you allow me, I want to mention two areas in which we can step up, scale up our cooperation and make a difference for millions of people in the world, yes? And there are two areas. One is vaccines, and the other is financial resources for the recovery and the transformation for a sustainable development world, yes? In terms of vaccines, COVAX has become better. The mechanism that we created for vaccine distribution is getting better and better. It has a very difficult start, but now it's a better mechanism. But still, the least developed countries have vaccinated only 5% of their population. For example, during these last months, the developed world has put more third doses than the developing world has put first doses of the vaccine. So still there is a gap, and we can bridge it if we do scale our support for vaccination in the developing world. My first point. And my second point is the financial resources. To avoid a debt crisis, to avoid more poverty and regress in terms of inequalities in the world. And here we have very important things to do. And I mentioned them, let me say, very quickly, 4 of them. First, we need to expand the DSSI, the postponement of the debt for the least developed countries. Because if we don't do that, this will be a great blow for those populations. We need to expand the common framework for debt treatment. We have to capitalize the development banks because we need investment, not only liquidity. We need to invest in the sustainable development goals, in the transformation for climate change. We need more investment for adaptation in the developing world. Not only mitigation, but adaptation is key. And we need to find a new mechanism for the reallocation of the special drawing rights. And we have the spring meetings of the IMF and the World Bank that is coming very soon. And this is a very important occasion to make these decisions and to scale up our support for the developing world. Let me just say that this is as important for peace as all the other issues, because we also need the democratic system to succeed, yes? And if we don't do anything in this crisis, governments will be in a very fragile position to really respond to the demands of the people.
John, you would like to respond to
Thank
those
you very much.
challenging issues? Yes.
Yeah. No, really, firstly to say I completely agree with every word that Rebecca has just said. But I think the underlying point is if we want people to believe that we support the multilateral system, we must behave in a way which is consistent of that. We can't say we believe in multilateralism and then respond to each new crisis in a way which is a repudiation of multilateral. It is quite extraordinary that we have allowed that vaccination gap to open up, partly because it is a repudiation of multilateralism and partly because it's counterproductive even in public health terms for the countries that can afford large quantities of vaccines. So we really, that's what I sort of meant before. We have to understand these are all political issues in a deeply existential political struggle. And we have to respond to them in that way. So the other thing I would say, and it just builds on what you said, Rebecca, about the special drawing rights, I think, in the climate process, which is the part of multilateralism that I have some familiarity with, an issue which has been there for a generation now is what's called loss and damage. The idea that those countries which are on the front line of the consequences of climate change, which are already in some cases suffering horrendous damage as a result of climate change, should receive some recognition of their predicament from those wealthier countries which are better able to deal with the climate impacts and whose emissions are the biggest cause of the problem in the first place. And we have talked and we have built a mountain of COP decisions and texts that we can now stand on and see the other side of the world talking about loss and damage, but we haven't addressed the problem. And now we are at a critical moment in that particular issue. And if we don't address it over the next few months, the COP27 in Egypt will fail and the climate process itself risks collapsing. And it's a difficult issue because it means in the end that wealthy countries are going to have to find more resources, somehow mobilize them to invest in helping those frontline countries. And it may well be that using the special drawing right mechanism is the best way through. But we need to take political decisions that allow us to do that at a time when we are going to be under massive fiscal pressure. One of the things that we can thank Mr. Putin for is a new prospect of a long period of fiscal stress and low growth and possibly recession again. And even in that context, we need to find it in ourselves to address this problem. And I just mention that as an example of a wider response to the question I was asking at the beginning. If we want to repair multilateralism, we need to look within it. What are the interventions that we can make that will be good for the processes that they're part of, in this case, the climate process, but will also be part of that wider healing and that wider reaffirmation that we really do believe we are a single human family. I don't know whether that makes sense, but that was what you stimulated, Rebecca.
Thank you, John. Now, Tanaka-san, you mentioned that the climate change issue is largely energy issue, and with respect to the climate change problems and the requirements for developing countries to do more, the financial aid, financial assistance is indispensable. And the developed countries have agreed to provide $100 billion a year. $100 billion a year to developing countries. Do you think that this sort of the efforts on the part of developed countries will be carried out? Still, the lack of money is posing a lot of problem for developing countries to cope with climate change issue.
Yeah, that's true. It's on. The pledge was not totally fulfilled by the developed countries. We know that, but still, there's a very strong, let's say, commitment and pledges to reach that level in the coming years. And also that the Glasgow COP26 made a very good advance for the, let's say, credit building or joint mechanisms to make it possible, because the cost of the carbon dioxide emission reduction is much, much cheaper in the developing countries relative to the developed ones. So to make the reduction in globally meaningful, to spend more money in developing economies make more sense. So how can make to both sides win-win is this kind of Article 4 mechanism of sharing the responsibility by transferring the money and the technology to the developing countries while gaining the carbon credit. So that kind of mechanism is now happening, and I think the collaboration with developing countries and developed ones are on the way. The carbon pricing is interesting, and carbon border measures, adjustment measures, which going to be initiated by the European Union, certainly trigger lots of pressure that how to harmonize the responsibility. And carbon price is not set to the, let's say, unified level for all countries. Certainly for the developed economies, it should be as high as $250 $250 per ton toward 2050, while for the less developed countries, it is just $50. So how to differentiate this kind of carbon pricing mechanism in the global context? Certainly, we need the multilateral agreement or multilateral framework to make it happen. So it's not easy, but I think sending that messages and making the, let's say, system of burden sharing through carbon pricing or offsetting or crediting, that is probably what we have to now focus on most in the COP meetings, in which is happening this year and next year.
Thank you. Thank you, Tanaka-san. Now, I have a couple of questions coming from the audience. One of them is the question about the future of our world after the pandemic. Now, we might be able to address the question of our future after this virus pandemic and after the invasion by Russia of Ukraine. Will the liberal international system be able to be maintained in the light of the situation where the trust among big players like United States and China and Russia, and now India must be included, is difficult to find. Now, anybody will be able to address this multilateral world, multilateral system after the pandemic, after the current crisis in Ukraine? John? Sorry, you are muted.
We keep doing that with Zoom, don't we? That five-letter word, trust, is really important. I come back to what I was trying to say earlier about learning to see the world through each other's eyes. I think it's dangerous to ask the question in that way, as if we were all members of the audience watching a play which is unfolding on the stage, and it's other people who will decide what the final act of that play is. We are all on this stage. We all need to remind ourselves, whatever we do, whatever jobs we have, whatever platforms we have, we are all political actors, and we are involved in a piece of existential politics. So we all need to use our political agency as effectively as possible, and we need to direct it towards that building of trust and that healing of divisions. I do think, just picking up something that Armida said, I mean, that there is, and actually Rebecca as well, because I think that connects to how we define the public interest and the role of governments, state governments, in representing public interest. Because we have seen now several examples of the need for a much more creative, proactive state to maintain the foundations of resilience. One anecdote, I remember, Nobuo-san will remember, that the UK has a tendency to agonize again and again about our energy system. And we have energy white papers. I think in my time in government, there were something like 12 different energy white papers produced, which was the new vision for energy in Britain. And I was part of several of those processes, and I remember one of them very well. They're always, it's always supposed to be under the control of the Energy Department, but in fact, it's under the control of the Treasury, the Finance Ministry, which is our all-powerful part of government. And I went along to the first meeting and I said, would it be a good idea this time to ask ourselves what we need to invest in order to have a resilient energy system, an energy system which is resilient to shocks, to supply shocks, to price spikes, and so on. And what I found was that I wasn't invited to any more meetings because neither the Treasury nor the Energy Department wanted to talk about resilience. They wanted an efficient energy system, which in real time, which would deliver energy as cheaply as possible and also satisfy their special interest stakeholders by which they had been captured. But I think if we want to rebuild trust, we need to empower our governments to make that the top priority that they have. Trust two ways: within countries, because many of us are now more divided internally than we can ever remember, but also between countries. And there's something that each one of us can do, even if we have no platform, no job, we just have our friends or our local activities. We can still use our voice in that kind of healing way. But it's a big challenge, and I don't know the outcome of it. Somebody mentioned a joke, which I gather was well known in Soviet Russia, when somebody asked whether we were standing on the edge of a precipice, and the answer was, no, we used to be standing on the edge of a precipice, but now we've taken a step forward. Well, we don't want to be, I think we are on the edge of a precipice and we don't want to go over it. But we all have a responsibility for that. And Ganbate is not the answer. Ganbate, muddling through now, we need to engage in transformation.
Thank you. Rebecca-san?
Yes, I think that is very important what John said in terms of all of us having a responsibility. And that responsibility includes, to defeat the anti-politics, to defeat the whole discourse that what we have to do is to get away from politics instead of building a better political system and building the political will to make the transformations that we have to build. I think that one of the things, John and Tanaka, maybe tell me if you feel the same, but I think that the SDGs and the climate change agreement in 2015, we were able to agree on those because we went from a narrative of the trade-offs to the narrative of the win-wins. And I think that now we are back into the narrative of the trade-offs, that we cannot gain this battle, for peace, for prosperity, for inclusivity, for sustainability together, that we have to give up one of those. And I think that that's part of the problem, that we have been, since 2015, we have regressed in our narrative, in our discourse, and on the political will to make the transformation that we thought could come together. Sustainable development is prosperity, inclusiveness, and sustainability. And we have to build that narrative again. Now, you said something, Tanaka said, and John said too, we need policy coherence. We cannot behave in a world against, the win-wins and think that will happen without our involvement, without, our capacity to really be coherent in terms of what we have to do at the international level. And I think that we still have an opportunity. And I think that young people are an opportunity, you know, to see the future in that way. And we have to involve much more, you know, the young. We have to involve much more the women. We have to involve much more the local authorities that have the problems in their hands. You know, we need really to deepen our engagement, to mobilize the will and the political will towards the objective that we have set at the multilateral, in the multilateral system.
Thank you, Rebecca-san. Rebecca-san and Ashton seem to be more optimistic than other people. Tanaka-san, are you also be optimistic?
Well, you know, I wish I will be optimistic, but you know, I read a book written by Yuval Noah Harari, the author of *Sapiens*. His book is about 21 lessons for the 21st century human being. That was fascinating. He said there are 3 risks for the current human being. One is a nuclear war, by the way, which may happen by this Russian Putin situation. And second is ecology. That's a climate change. The third one is the artificial intelligence and this technological destruction. You know, AI will take over the human decision. So, but for these 3 major challenges for human being, we need a people or leaders with global identity. The politics is always local. And now, under the challenge of populism, so democracy or liberalism is in trouble. So at least when we are voting people, the politician, we have to ask them, he said, I mean, Harari is saying that, ask them if they understand these 3 questions, and at least, if not, the solution is not easy, but at least understand that there are 3 major challenges of human being, and he is thinking about it. So he mentioned also this, global identity. The leaders with global identity could be found in Europe, because European Union was created after the Second World War, and by the commitment of Germans and French not killing each other, and 60 years now, and now Europe is showing the great solidarity against Putin. So I have a hope that global identity could be tested, but can be created somehow. And it is a difficulty. We have to just John said, gambatte, for the leaders to think about the global identity and collaborate together. Otherwise, we are really in a deep trouble.
Thank you, Tanaka-san. Thank you, Tanaka-san. Indeed, this current crisis may be the time for a chance for the multilateralism or regionalism to work better. Now, John, you have got 1 minute to
just
say...
very quickly, just picking up what Nobuo-san has just said. What is sustainable development really? I mean, it seems to me we have created, through globalization, through technology, through our increasing reach, we have created an extraordinary degree of interdependence. So that our destinies, wherever we are in the world, our destinies are intertwined with everybody else's, and also intertwined with with nature itself. And sustainable development is really coming to terms with that and learning how to behave as if we really are, we sink or swim together, if I can put it like that. That's really difficult. It's not what we've evolved for. We are fundamentally tribal. We are good at seeing our differences before we see what we have in common. But that's the new politics that we have to build if we want to avoid walking over that precipice. And I always reject, people say, am I optimistic or pessimistic? I think we can only find out by going forward. But we know the path is made by walking, in the words of Machado, the great Spanish poet. The path isn't there already in front of us. But we have to believe we can do it. Gramsci, the Italian communist writer, was a pessimist of the intellect and an optimist of the will, and maybe that's I would accept that.
Thank you, John. And the last 1 minute for Rebecca-san.
Let me build on that. You know, optimistic and pessimistic people die the same, but they live differently. So I think that we have to take that on ourselves, yes, to make a difference and to understand of our interdependence, because we are in a turning point, you know, really, with the crisis and with the threat on peace. So let's remember that song. Let's give multilateralism a chance, because it's our only chance to make this world better. So that will be my final thought.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your contributions. Indeed, multilateralism is in danger, but we should not despair. We will be able to build up on what we have made, and the current crisis here and there will make us realize that indeed multilateralism needs to be strengthened, maintained, and we've got to work for that. So thank you very much, John, Rebecca-san, and Tanaka-san. I wish you all the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you.